Victoria from Biblio Lifestyle, and you're listening to the Reader's Couch podcast, the show that will help you bridge the gap between living a full and busy life to one where you're reading, learning new things, and having fun. Today on the couch, I'm so happy to welcome author Georgie Blalock. We talk about her latest novel, An Indiscreet Princess, but we also spill a lot of royal tea, specifically about the Windsors and the Sussexes, and we also talk about the royal we think Meghan Markle is the most similar to. And spoiler alert, it's not Diana. Georgie also gives us some book and bookstore recommendations, tips for readers currently in a reading slump, and her stand on the great debate of rereading books. So, without further ado, let's get into the show because I can't wait for you to listen to my chat with Georgie Blalock. A funny, tender, and beautifully written novel to add to your TBRs is The Hero of This Book by Elizabeth McCracken. 10 months after her mother's death, the narrator of The Hero of This Book takes a trip to London. The city was a favourite of her mother's, and as the narrator wanders the streets, she finds herself reflecting on her mother's life and their relationship, along with thoughts of the past and questions for the future. The hero of this book is a novel about a writer's relationship with her larger-than-life mother and about the very nature of writing, memory, and art. Ultimately, though, the hero of this book is an examination of grief and renewal. The Hero of This Book by Elizabeth McCracken is being published by Eco Books, and it's a tender, heartbreaking, but also funny novel you really don't want to miss. Hi readers, welcome again to the Reader's Couch. I'm your host, Victoria Wood, and here on the couch with me is a history and movie buff, but she's also the author of The Other Windsor Girl and The Last Debutantes. But she's here to talk to me about her latest novel, An Indiscreet Princess. Please welcome to the couch, Georgie Blalock. Hey Georgie.
Hello, how are you?
Yay, I'm doing well. Super excited to have you here. Thrilled that An Indiscreet Princess is now available in bookstores everywhere. I mean, how are you feeling? How excited are you about it?
I'm very excited. It's always exciting when a book comes out because, you're done with it. Writing is so much fun, but at times it's not, and it can be a struggle and it can be great. And there's a lot of work that goes into it. So once it all finally comes together and it's launched, it's wonderful to kind of see it out there and in the world, especially a lot of people tag me on Instagram with the book. And it's just so much fun to see people reacting to it and enjoying it and talking about it.
Absolutely. So I want readers to hear it straight from you. Tell us about your novel, An Indiscreet Princess, and what can readers expect when they pick up your book?
If readers love a royal rebel, then they'll love this book. This is about Princess Louise, who was Queen Victoria's fourth daughter. I think she was number 6 out of her 9 children. And she lived a very remarkable life. The book takes place between about 1869 and about 1885, I believe. And Princess Louise was unique in that she was a trailblazer for that time. She was an artist. She was a sculptress. And even being a sculptress at that time was considered a very masculine art because it's very physical. And it was something that she had shown a talent for and that her father, Prince Albert, had nurtured. And she really fought her mother to be able to have a career as a sculptress, as far as she could within the confines of being a princess. And she was doing it with a mother who was queen and whose, mere suggestions became rules. And she really had to fight her mother to have this career as a sculptress. She was the first royal to attend a public school. She went to the National Art Training School. She also had a lover, Joseph Edgar Bohm, who was a very well-known sculptor at the time. He has since faded from memory because her era was filled with so many luminaries, from the pre-Raphaelites to Whistler and James McNeill Whistler and John Singer Sargent and all these big names. So Joseph Edgar Boehm kind of faded into obscurity since then. But at the time, he was sculptor in ordinary to the Queen, and he and Louise had a relationship for a number of years. And all of these things that she had, this life, she had to fight for all of it, because it was not something that a royal princess was expected to do back then. They were expected to get married, maybe make an international alliance. And even though she did get married, she chose to marry an Englishman or a Scotsman, the Duke of Argyle's son, who, even though he's the son of a duke, he's considered a commoner. Even though he's an aristocrat, but he's still a commoner. And so she really fought for that life in a way that we always think of as modern royals doing that, Princess Diana, but she did it 100 years before.
The thing I found interesting about Louise is that there's not much known about her. There's not much written. There's not much published. I mean, how were you able to for one, find information about her? What was your research like? And why Louise? Why did you decide to tell her story?
Researching her was a challenge because, like you said, there isn't that much available. You would think there would be. But at the same time, Queen Victoria had 9 children. And I think once you got down to, 6, 7, and 8 or whatever, she didn't really write that much about them. And at the time, even though they did deal with a very intrusive press, there was still an understanding with the press that they couldn't be as intrusive as they are now. I mean, they were a nuisance, but in a very different way. Also, there is some potential scandal with Princess Louise. A really great book about her is Lucinda Huxley's Queen Victoria's Mysterious Daughter. And I read that and I was just fascinated with Princess Louise's life. And that was where I got the idea for the book. And I remember thinking, how is it that we don't know that much about this woman who was a trailblazer for the time, who defied so many conventions? And then you start to do the research and discover that, yes, there isn't a whole lot that's out there about her. One of the things is with Queen Victoria is that she was a prolific letter writer and a prolific journalist. Mm-hmm. And I got a hold of, they're all published. You can get them all. And I got a hold of them and I started flipping through and I was very surprised at how few mentions there were of Princess Louise in there. But what happened is Princess Beatrice, who was the youngest of her children and who ended up sort of being her caretaker towards the end, went through those journals and got rid of a lot of stuff, burned a lot of her mother's letter, cleaned up the journals. And so there is belief among, historians and biographers that a lot of really good information was lost. There are some scandals surrounding Princess Louise. One of the things Lucinda Huxley talks about is that she believes that Princess Louise had an illegitimate child. That wasn't something I really dealt with in the book. I think I sort of mentioned it, but I didn't deal with it. And there's a lot of belief that because of that, a lot of the correspondence and information surrounding Louise was burned by Princess Beatrice. And then also I believe none of the biographers that have done the very few biographies that exist of Louise have been able to get into the royal archives and look at what information they have about Princess Louise. And some believe it's because of this issue with the baby or her relationship with Joseph Edgar Boehm. But whatever secret there is, it has meant that there's not as much information out there.
But it works to your favor because you're a novelist. So you can kind of, remake and weave in some possibilities for us. And I think that's what you did here with An Indiscreet Princess. I agree with you 100%. I think Louise was ahead of her time attending the National Art Training School. Most women are preoccupied with finding a husband, but she obviously went a different way. But she does eventually marry, and her marriage was sold as, one of a love match, when in truth, she could not forget about her lover. He, on the other hand, though, seemed very keen on receiving an appointment, so it kind of felt to me like a marriage of convenience, maybe. What were your thoughts on her marriage?
I think it was a marriage of convenience because even though a lot of what I do in the book is fictional, because like you said, there's information, but there's not information. So I filled in a lot of gaps. But what I read about her husband, who was the Marquis of Lorne and eventually the Duke of Argyll, is that he was after appointments. He did ask for appointments. He wanted them. He craved them. And one of the things about Queen Victoria is she was kind of stingy with her kids and her family about the roles they gave him. It's one of the problems that she had with her eldest son, Bertie, is that instead of really giving him responsibilities and training him to be king, she kind of let him just flail about. And that led to a lot of his, he had a lot of scandals.
Yes.
And that led to that because he didn't have a real job. And so the Marquis of Lorne, when he comes into the family, he wants positions. And one of the only positions he gets is when he's appointed to the Governor Generalship of Canada. So he's basically Queen Victoria's representative in Canada. And he does very well there, actually. He was actually very well traveled before he met Louise. So when he was younger, he'd met Garibaldi in Italy. He had traveled to Canada and he loved the country. He had been down to the Caribbean. He was very well traveled for a man of his station and of that time. And I think he did genuinely want to help in Canada and did a really good job. But it's the only time he really got anything. And a lot of people think, and I use this in the book, that he was sent away to kind of make sure that Louise went with him because she was starting to get into trouble and to defy her mother in a way that Queen Victoria did not approve of, because she ruled her children with an iron fist. And Louise, if you look at the difference between Louise and her elder sister, Helena, Queen Victoria completely runs roughshod over Helena and dictates her whole life in a way that Princess Louise won't allow. And it's something that Queen Victoria is not used to. She's not used to people standing up to her. She's not used to people questioning her or not following her, every dictate. And so a lot of the reason people think that Lorne was sent to Canada was because of Louise. But even when he comes home, he keeps asking for appointments and doesn't get them. And then eventually he goes on to write a biography of her that does really well. He was someone who, even before he married Louise, had been kind of chasing fame. He had written his travel journals. And so I think he saw an opportunity, and she saw an opportunity because after she hits a certain age, people tap at their watches and they're like, you need to get married. And she didn't want to go and marry a foreign prince because she had seen how her two eldest sisters had dealt with that, and the way that when they had married heads of countries and then those countries get into wars, it causes all these problems. And so, she wanted to stay at home. And it was something that was sold to the public as a love story, that supposedly it was this love match, and they ended up having to sell it as that, even though at some point they couldn't stand each other. Eventually they settle into a friendship in real life, and she takes care of him all the way through. He dies of, they think, Alzheimer's, and she takes care of him through all of that. But they weren't really that wild about each other. It was a marriage of convenience.
Right, absolutely. So there's no way I can have you on the show. We're talking about a book that is royal and not have some commentary on recent events. Queen Elizabeth. Tell us your thoughts on Queen Elizabeth, the monarchy changing hands after so many, many years. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I watched all of that because it's such a moment in history. Because I had a lot of friends ask me this. A lot of, my friends are like, well, why it's British. Why do you care? And part of it is I spend so much time in this world. Between my book, The Other Windsor Girl, where I researched Princess Margaret, which meant researching Queen Elizabeth, and researching the royal family, I watched it. And part of it too was seeing these rituals and these things happen that the last time they happened was 70 years ago. Like, one of the things I watched was when they make the announcement from St. James's Palace declaring King Charles the new king. The only time I'd really seen anything like that was I was doing some research for something about Wallis Simpson, and there's that same ceremony taking place in 1936, and she's watching it with the Duke of Windsor. And so to see it actually happening for the first time in 70 years. And also, I think with Queen Elizabeth, it's really the end of an era. I mean, this is someone who knew Winston Churchill during World War II. This is someone, he was her prime minister. She was a connection to a time that is gone, and a time I've written about and done a lot of research about. And so watching that sort of changing of the guard, it was interesting. It was very interesting, and something I couldn't help but watch.
I think it's something lovers of historical fiction or history in general would gravitate towards for sure. And like you mentioned, this has never happened in many of our lifetimes. So for me, this was a first as well, just kind of watching everything transpire. And to be honest, I can't wait to see what books come from this.
Yes. Well, it was interesting too, because like I remember telling my husband, when I started to see like new stuff come through, I said, just from the research I've done, I know that these kind of things are very, for lack of a better word, stage managed.
Mm-hmm.
And I was telling him all about how when I think it was George V died, Queen Elizabeth's grandfather, the way they stage managed that. So it would get in the newspapers, in the evening papers, because they were more prestigious. And then I was telling him about, this is stuff that they haven't done in 70 years. I said, when Queen Victoria died, she'd been on the throne since she was 18.
Mm-hmm.
They had to go look stuff up to see how to do things, because anybody that remembered how to do it was dead. And so it was kind of interesting to see something somewhat similar playing out in real time.
Yeah. No, I saw those bits as well. I mean, even the controversy with Harry and his uniform or no uniform,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
it's like protocols, that's the most prominent one I can remember right now. But
Yes.
yeah, there are many different little, I don't want to say faux pas, but, moments of question where they're like, okay, do we do this or not do this?
Right.
And because so much has changed, do we still adhere to this, or is this something we're usher in, something new? So I think it's very interesting and fascinating.
And it's fun to see it come to life in a way that when you've only ever seen it in newsreels or you've read about it, to finally see it happening.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, as mentioned in my introduction, you've previously written 2 books, The Other Windsor Girl and The Last Debutante, and now we have An Indiscreet Princess. I mean, how is it similar to or different from writing each of these books?
With An Indiscreet Princess, because I go back into the late Victorian era, it was a lot of different research. One of the things that was great about The Last Debutante and The Other Windsor Girl is because they take place during a time when you have, TV and film footage. There were many things I could go back and actually find newsreels about and watch them and get a sense of things that were happening. I didn't have that option with the Princess Louise book. And yes, I could go back and look at newspaper articles, but the way things were covered back then was a little bit drier sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And or quite the other extreme, which was incredibly overly flattering. And so I didn't have that sort of visual record of everything. So that was provided challenges at times, which, I mean, it's also good because I can, fill in the blanks with the fiction. So that was a huge difference between all of the books. I think in a lot of ways they were similar, because when I did with The Other Windsor Girl, I'm dealing with Princess Margaret, who was also a rebel. But it was interesting to see how, even though she lived in a more modern era, I mean, that book takes place between 1949 and 1959. Mm-hmm. It almost seemed like Princess Margaret was more constrained by royal convention than Princess Louise was, which I found interesting. But they were both princesses who they understood their duty and they understood the kind of unique role they're in, but at the same time rebelled against it because they wanted their own lives. And I think Princess Louise was more successful in obtaining that.
Right. Okay. If you could tell your younger writing self anything, looking back, these are 3 historical fiction books you have under your belt. What would you tell your younger writing self?
I think I would just tell myself that, yes, keep going, because it does happen. There's so many times when you're first starting out and there's just setback after setback, or just so much time goes by when nothing happens, and then all of a sudden things happen. And when they happen, it's great, but it takes a while to get there. And there are days where it's frustrating because you're putting all this effort into learning your craft and writing, and nothing's happening. But then all of a sudden it does. And so I think that encouragement that, yes, I know you're frustrated right now, but keep going. It happens.
I love it. That's awesome. So I know you just had a book out, but I'm also curious because, for most of my listeners, we are aware books take time to happen. Sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 2 years or even more. But I'm curious, are you working on anything else right now, Georgie? Are there any other books in our future?
I'm working on a proposal right now that does deal with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. I don't know how much people know about them, but they're sold as the love story of the century. But there's a really darker side to not only their relationship but their activities during World War II. And so I'm exploring that, and I'm hoping to make that my next book.
Ooh, exciting! Any teasers about the Duke and Duchess that you would want to?
Well, they were not. There was a lot. They were angry at what their treatment by Britain, and I think they were very eager to. The Duke was eager to get back on the throne, and I think Wallis was eager to claim the throne that she had, aimed for and missed. And they were both prepared that if Germany beat England, to be reinstalled as puppet monarchs on the Germans' behalf, and the Germans knew that.
Right. So my question, I guess, is do you see any similarities with the Windsors and the Sussexes? Because, I've seen some conversation over the years about just, even though there are different circumstances in that, one was in line, one abdicated, and one was not. But, just the circumstances of how they were treated publicly. Do you see any similarities?
I think the similarities I see, and this may not be a popular opinion, is the way Wallis Simpson really worked to try and social climb. I think in a lot of ways, I see that with Meghan.
Yeah.
I know that might not be a popular opinion, but yeah. And that when it kind of fell short of maybe what they had in mind for how that was going to play out, that it turned into kind of maybe a bitterness,
right?
If that's a good way to say it, that brings out maybe not the best side in people.
I kind of see the similarities, which is why I'm very curious, as someone who's obsessed with history and obviously writes about it. I was just very curious about it because in a way I see similarities as well, where there are similarities with Wallis versus Meghan. I know it's popular to compare her to Diana, but I don't see it that way.
I don't see it that way either. I see it more with Wallis. And I think especially because since they're both American.
Yeah.
And I think because they're American, they don't have that sense of what the monarchy really is and what it means. So they're more that outsider's view of it, which isn't always correct. And it's something I think that's very hard for Americans to grasp.
Yeah.
And so I always sort of felt like, again, this might not be a popular opinion, but with Princess Diana, how did you kind of not know what you were getting into? Like you knew what it was, you lived with it. Like, I know it was worse and all that. But I think with the Americans, they don't quite get it. And because of it, they maybe approach it a different way that's not great.
No, I get it. I get you 100%. I do think there was like a bit of an understanding with Diana. I'm not saying it was a great time, but
yeah, it was great. And it wasn't a great situation, but you understood the institution far better than
100%. I just appreciate that we actually see eye to eye, because you're right, it's not popular because I have said this before. I do see similarities with Wallis and Meghan. I don't see the similarities with Diana. I really don't.
Right.
So it's really quite interesting. I hope that book happens with the Windsors.
I do too.
Because I do think there's so much there. Between those two, and I think it would be good to revisit it, and maybe fiction would be a great way to do that as well.
Well, I think because everybody focuses on it was the love story of the century, and even that is not that true. If you start to do the research, this is somebody who made a play for her king, and it did not work. And when it didn't work, she really had no choice but to marry him.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of evidence that was not necessarily her first choice. But, she got herself in that situation and had no choice but to play it through.
Yeah, absolutely. Get ready to be transported to the Mediterranean this winter when you add The Seamstress of Sardinia by Bianca Pizzorno to your reading list. The Seamstress of Sardinia is a dramedy of manners, family, romance, and fashion that is set in the end of the 19th century on the island of Sardinia. In the novel, we meet a talented seamstress, and it's through her eyes we see the flawed yet affable residents of this small Italian city, who are not quite what they pretend to be. There are love affairs and broken hearts, and even a murder. Or was it suicide? But at the center of it all, watching and waiting, is the seamstress herself, an intelligent, ambitious girl with a tender heart and her own impossible dream. The Seamstress of Sardinia is being published by Harper Perennial, and it's an atmospheric, rich, detailed period piece with compelling characters you really don't want to miss. Alrighty, so I know we're here talking all things royals and an indiscreet princess, but I know readers want to hear from you, Georgie, about your reading life. So tell me about the last book or books that you finished reading that you'd now recommend.
So I've been doing a lot of research for the Wallace Simpson proposal. And so if people are interested in that topic, there's a book, I think it came out in March, called Traitor King by, I think his name is Andrew Lowy. I might have that slightly wrong. Highly recommend that. It really goes into what went on after the abdication, and some of it is shocking. There are things that, for somebody who spends as much time with royals as I do, even I didn't know. And it was pretty eye-opening. So I've been really heavily into the nonfiction stuff right now. Another really good one for people who are interested in Wallace Simpson is That Woman by Anna Seba, I think her name is. Mm-hmm. And that's another one where you see a lot of the ugliness behind the myth. But it's fascinating at the same time because you kind of see how things work.
Amazing. One nonfiction book I'll add to that, because I actually read this one and loved it. I think it came out maybe a year or two ago. It's The Crowning Crisis.
Yes, I have that book. That is a good one.
It was so good. The Crowning Crisis, Alexander Larman, The Countdown to Abdication. Mm-hmm. I have that one on my shelf still. I thought it was really, really, really well done. It gets really deep into the abdication crisis itself,
right,
and just the entire drama around that. So yeah, that was quite interesting. But when you're not researching, Georgie, what are your go-to reading genres?
I do read a lot of historical fiction. So I think I recently read Renee Rosen's Fifth Avenue Glamour Girls. That was a very good book. Yeah. And I'm trying to think of what else I've read. A lot of Chanel Cleaton. She's got a great series about this Cuban family. And I highly recommend that series. It's very good. Our Last Days in Havana, I think, is, and highly recommend that. That one's very good. And then Kate Quinn, I enjoy her stuff because you get that nice intrigue.
Yes, I love a good Kate Quinn book as well.
Yes.
Have you been reading any classics lately? Any classics you maybe read for the first time?
I read A Gentleman Prefer Blonde. I actually listened to the audiobook of that. And because I love the movie, the Marilyn Monroe movie, and I don't think I had known for some reason that it was based on a book, and they had the book. And it's a fun book to read. The other one, and this is kind of a weird one, but if you've ever read The Sex and the Single Girl by Helen Gurley Brown, that's a fun read. It's not a fiction book, but there's a cute Natalie Wood movie about it. It's not a great movie, but it's cute. And then I cannot remember who did a book about Helen Gurley Brown a few years ago, because I read that too. That was a fiction book and it was really good. But it's a fun book that's kind of a peek into a different time.
Yeah. I love that. Sometimes I like, going somewhere completely different, and especially when the language it's being written in is in a different style. I enjoy that as well.
It's like if you have I have this old etiquette book, I think it's from the 50s, and there's this whole section on smoking and smoking etiquette. And it's just fun to look at that because, you just realize how much things are different.
Absolutely. It's like watching movies and seeing people smoking in the office, in the car.
Oh, yeah, drinking.
and
Drinking. They got a bar in
drinking.
the office.
Yes. Not wearing seatbelts. It just
Oh,
really takes you
yes.
back to a time. Well, not that you weren't wearing seatbelts. The cars never had
They didn't
seatbelts.
have them. I know. And it's interesting to watch because like if you watch the old Thin Man movies and he's drinking all the time and nobody thinks, everybody walks in the door and like, hey, you want a drink? Yeah, sure. Like, it's 2 in the afternoon.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I have two reading questions that I think are the great debate always, especially on social. Do you reread books? And if you do, what was your last reread? And what's just your general take on rereading books?
I do reread books, especially my all-time favorites.
Ooh.
I don't reread as much as I wish I could. Simply because I'm constantly doing research, and so there's a lot to read there. But some of my like one of my all-time favorite books is Watership Down, and I went back and reread that a few years ago, and then recently Audible had the audiobook on sale, and so I'll probably go back and re-listen to that pretty soon. And so yes, I do like to go back and reread stuff because it's amazing how much you forget sometimes, especially as time goes on, and then every time you come back to these favorites, the reason they were a favorite back then compared to when I read it now changes. And you find new meanings sometimes and new depth or things that, because you have different life experience now. And so maybe different parts of the book touch you in a way that you might have skimmed over 15, 20 years ago. And it's neat to rediscover it for that reason.
Oh, absolutely. I agree with that one 100%. And the next big debate is if you were being taken to a deserted island and you could only bring one book, what book are you bringing, Georgie?
I would probably take Stephen King's The Stand because one, it's really long. And two, it's one of my all-time favorite, but I remember first reading that when I was at summer camp. Last year, no, many years ago. And it was kind of one of these ones that we were, when we were at summer camp, we had cots that we were sleeping outside. And so I kind of always associate that book with being more rustic, I guess is a good way to say it. And so the idea of being on a desert island and not being at, a 4-star resort and reading that book, I think that would be a good fit.
Oh, I love it. That's awesome. Now, a problem readers tend to have, and I don't know if this is something you've experienced as well, I'm going to go on a limb and say yes, but I think we all have, but sometimes we do fall into those reading slumps. So what advice would you give someone who's fallen into a reading slump right now and the words on the page just aren't sticking with them? What advice would you give?
I think that would be a good time to go back and look at something familiar, something that you loved, or to try something completely different. Read outside your genre. Read something you wouldn't normally pick up. And maybe, it might take a couple books outside the genre to kind of shock you into that, but just something that's different and out of the ordinary so that you're sort of forced to pay attention. Because, sometimes that happens. You read and you hit the end of it and you're like, I don't know what I just read.
So true.
And it's not because you didn't enjoy the book. It's just, I don't know. Sometimes that happens. But so if you read something different where you're forced to pay attention, then I think that kind of snaps you out of it.
Right. Okay, I love that advice. So in addition to loving books, we also love our bookstores. So share with our listeners your favorite, whether local or childhood favorite, or maybe something you discovered this summer. Share with us some of your favorite indie bookstores.
So Warwick's in La Jolla. I live in San Diego. So I love that bookstore. It's in this cute little part of La Jolla. It's like they call it the Village. And they're very supportive of authors and they have a great selection. And they have a fun section too. They have the book section, which is really big, but then they have, the notebooks and the cards and stuff. And I have a notebook addiction and a pen addiction. It's sad, but I admit it. And so I love being able to just go in there and browse. And then one of the other things I really enjoy is a lot of libraries around here have the used bookstores. Mm-hmm. And I just love going in there because that's a lot of times where I find research books that are things I would have never stumbled across otherwise.
Right, right. Absolutely. I love a good library bookshop. I love a good used bookshop too,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes you really do discover some things. I mean, I find some treasures
You
hidden.
find things you don't even know existed.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
then I think what is it? I found one time it was some kind of guide for people who were married to ambassadors and then were living overseas.
Really?
And it was just the most fascinating read because it was how to do things, how to approach things. And like, I would have never gone searching for that book. I would have never thought to do a search for it. But then it just showed up and I'm like, this is fascinating. And so
Oh,
I bought it. Because the other thing too is when you're doing all this research for books, sometimes you don't know you need something until you hit that point. You're like, oh, wait a minute. I have that weird book on ambassadors. I wonder if that would have something I can use. And sure enough, it does.
wow. Okay, that is amazing. And I just love the fact that you just stumbled upon this thing and
Mm-hmm.
it turned out to be extremely captivating. See, I love when that happens, when I actually buy a book and then I just start eating it up right away.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, oh, this is fascinating. And then when you need it, you can go find it on your shelf. So that
Yes.
is amazing. Awesome. Okay, so kind of wrapping things up together and also going back to An Indiscreet Princess. I mean, I know you've done your job, you've written the book, you've given it to us, and now it's up to us as readers. But I'm curious, in an ideal world, I guess maybe, what are you hoping readers might feel or think or maybe learn? What reactions are you hoping for after someone has turned the last page on An Indiscreet Princess?
I think I'm hoping to inspire people to keep striving towards things that they want to achieve. And because that's one of the things that Princess Louise has to do with everything from her artistic career to just the choices she can make in her life to her relationships, is that even when things are difficult, if you kind of keep focusing on what you want, that if you're also willing to be a little creative or you're willing to be a little flexible, that you can have these things. It might take a little struggling, might take a lot of struggling, but it can be done. And I think that's what I hope people take away from it.
Oh, that's amazing. Georgie, thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking with me and sharing with us An Indiscreet Princess and all things books and reading and bookstores. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I very much enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening to the Reader's Couch podcast. Please subscribe to the show, share it with a friend, and take a few seconds to leave a rating and review. Until next time, stay lounging, stay reading, and whenever you're in doubt, go straight to your local bookstore or library. Thanks again for listening, and happy reading.